what if the biggest problems humanity ever faced, famine, plague, war, what if they're not really our main worries anymore? And what if, instead, we're starting to aim for things like, well, immortality, total bliss, even becoming kind of godlike?
Right. It sounds like pure sci-fi, doesn't it? But that's the core question Yuval Noah Harari tackles.
Yeah.
It's a massive shift, a really fundamental change in what humanity is aiming for. We're moving past basic survival, which was, everything for millennia.
Yeah, exactly. To something much bigger, almost unbelievable. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into Harari's book, Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow. It's a seriously thought-provoking read.
It really is. It's not just predicting the future, it's looking back at how we got here, our successes, and then projecting forward based on that. Harari basically argues we've kind of won the old battles against famine, plague, war, largely, and the consequences of that are huge.
Absolutely. It challenges, well, pretty much everything we assume about being human. So our mission today is to unpack the main ideas in Homo Deus. We want to explore this new human agenda, the one driven by tech and our changing beliefs. How might it reshape us?
Well, get into the core arguments, the surprising insights, the stuff that really makes you stop and think about who we are and where we might be heading. Think of this as your guide to a book that sparked a ton of debate.
Okay, let's dive right in. Because Harari starts with something pretty stunning, that humanity has actually been incredibly successful against those ancient nightmares. He points out that for the first time ever, more people die from eating too much than too little. Just let that sink in for a moment.
Yeah. That's a complete reversal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Unimaginable for most of human history. And it's such a crucial starting point for his whole argument. Famine used to be this constant background dread.
Right.
When our ancestors prayed to be delivered from famine, they knew what that meant. Real starvation.
Yeah.
Not knowing where the next meal's coming from.
And now?
Now, mass famines are, well, they're exceptions. Almost always. They're caused by politics, by conflict, by human failures. Not by nature, just deciding to starve us.
He gives some brutal examples, like Scotland in the 1690s, Finland.
Yeah.
Huge percentages of populations just wiped out by hunger.
Exactly. And most of us today, in developed countries at least, our biggest food worry is maybe skipping lunch, feeling a bit hungry.
It's a world away. The contrast is just stark.
And Harari stresses this isn't just about growing more food. It's the whole system, the technology, the economics, the political safety nets we've built. It's this complex web that keeps most of us away from that biological poverty line, and it's all relatively new.
A success we totally take for granted.
We really do.
Okay, so that's famine. Then there's plague, epidemics. Historically, these were civilization enders, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. The Black Death is famous, but Harari points out the epidemics that hit the Americas after Europeans arrived were arguably even worse. Smallpox in Mexico, 1520.
He paints this terrifying picture, right? Indigenous people with no immunity, watching neighbors drop dead.
Yeah, the Mayas thinking it was evil gods flying around, the Aztecs blaming Spanish black magic, total helplessness, priests praying, trying useless remedies, corpses piling up.
This is horrific.
And contrast that with today. We have global travel networks that are way more efficient than in 1918 during the Spanish flu. Logically, diseases should spread faster.
But they don't, generally.
Exactly. The incidence, the impact of epidemics is way down. Look at global child mortality, less than 5% now. That's incredible progress.
He even frames AIDS, which was devastating, as, well, almost a sign of progress, which sounds odd.
It does sound odd, but his point is that AIDS showed human incompetence in dealing with a new threat, not some unstoppable force of nature or divine wrath. We eventually developed treatments, prevention methods. We learned.
Like with Ebola more recently. Huge panic, but it was largely contained.
Right. We can fight these things now. But, and this is a key point, as biotechnology advances, we become the potential threat, engineering worse diseases, wielding more power.
So, conquering external threats leads to new internal ones, human-made ones. Okay, famine, plague. The third one is war. And the historical stats on violence are just shocking.
Yeah, something like 15% of deaths in ancient agricultural societies were from human violence. 15%.
Compared to maybe 1% today, globally.
Roughly, yeah. The decline is dramatic. Harari says the old law of the jungle, the strong just taking out the weak, violence as the default solution that law has been, in his words, broken if not rescinded, especially since 1945.
He uses that Chekhov's gun idea, right? The Cold War's nuclear arsenal.
Exactly. The gun was on the table, loaded, for decades. Biggest gun imaginable. But it was never fired. He argues that wasn't luck, it was a conscious choice. Humanity learned somehow to resist that ultimate temptation.
So Harari lists these victories: famine, plague, war, largely tamed. Why emphasize this so much? What's the takeaway for us now?
Well, it fundamentally changes the game, doesn't it?
Right.
It means, first, there's hope. We can solve huge problems. But second, it means responsibility. If people are still suffering from famine or dying from preventable diseases or being killed in wars, Harari says we can't just shrug and blame God or nature anymore.
It's on us.
It's increasingly on us. It's about human power, human decisions, human failures. Our moral landscape has shifted because our capabilities have shifted.
Okay, this is where it starts getting really wild. He brings in this concept of the Anthropocene. Not just a geological term, but the era where humans became the single biggest force changing the planet's ecology.
Yeah, over the last, 70,000 years, it's unprecedented. No single species has ever done that before, reshaped the entire global ecosystem.
How so?
We broke down barriers, moved plants, animals, microbes all over the planet, created this single interconnected global ecological unit, whether we meant to or not. Think invasive species, global agriculture.
And the impact on other animals. It's not a pretty picture.
No. Even ancient hunter-gatherers, maybe without fully realizing it, likely drove things like mammoths to extinction. But the agricultural revolution, that kicked off mass extinctions on a whole new, much more obvious scale.
We terraform the planet for ourselves.
Pretty much. And Harari really focuses on how we've treated domesticated animals, farm animals. He talks about their ancestral needs. Meaning these animals evolved over millions of years to have specific physical, emotional, social needs.
Yeah.
Needs that industrial farming often completely ignores.
Like locking them in tiny cages, mutilations, separating mothers and babies.
Exactly. He draws this really disturbing parallel to those old Harry Harlow monkey experiments.
Yeah. The wire mother versus the cloth mother.
Right. Showing how vital comfort and connection are. Harari basically says the meat and dairy industries are running a massive Harlow experiment on billions of sentient beings year after year.
Which raises the question,
Yeah.
How do we justify that? How have we rationalized it?
Well, traditionally, Harari points to religious narratives. The idea of human exceptionalism, that we have dominion, that animals lack an eternal soul.
Making them just resources, extras in our story.
Kinda, yeah. Which contrasts sharply with older animistic views, where animals were seen as other persons, co-inhabitants you might need to negotiate with, like the Nayaka people he mentions.
And science, particularly evolution, challenged that soul idea, right?
Massively. Harari argues the idea of a soul, this fixed, unchanging essence, fundamentally clashes with evolution's emphasis on constant change and biological continuity. No sharp line between humans and other animals.
Which was, and still is, deeply unsettling for many people. He mentions the unbridled hatred for Darwin's theory, partly stemming from this. It felt like it deprived us of our souls.
Exactly. It chipped away at that sense of unique specialness.
So if it's not a soul that makes us special, what is it, according to Harari? What allowed us to dominate?
It comes down to one key thing: our ability to cooperate flexibly in very large numbers, through shared imagination. Our ability to believe in things that exist only in our collective minds. Money, corporations, nations, human rights.
Things like the US dollar, Google, the EU, they aren't physical objects.
Exactly. They're
Yeah.
intersubjective realities. They exist and have power because we collectively agree they do. Language is the tool that builds these realities.
And Harari predicts these fictions are becoming even more powerful.
Yeah, he suggested in the 21st century, fiction might become the most potent force on Earth, blurring lines with reality, even getting coded into our biology and technology.
He uses some mind-bending historical examples, like gods in ancient Sumer acting like corporations.
Right. Owning land, giving loans, paying salaries. Because gods don't die or have inheritance issues, they could accumulate huge power, enabling larger-scale cooperation than any human could manage alone. It was a clever social technology.
Or the idea of the pharaoh in Egypt. The imagined pharaoh, the divine ruler, was more important than the actual person.
Absolutely. That shared belief, that fiction, allowed for massive projects like building canals, pyramids, running a huge bureaucracy. It organized millions of people.
And writing was crucial for solidifying these fictions.
Hugely important. Written laws, decrees, religious texts, even borders drawn on maps, they take on a reality of their own. Think of visas saving lives during the Holocaust, based purely on a signature on paper.
Or those fabricated grain reports in Mao's China leading to real starvation.
Or the Berlin Conference, literally drawing lines on a map of Africa, creating nations out of thin air, ignoring the reality on the ground, with consequences that last to this day. Fiction shaping reality.
This leads him to talk about religion. He defines it quite broadly, doesn't he?
He does, as basically any system of human norms and values founded on a belief in some superhuman order or law, something not invented by humans that must be obeyed.
And provocatively, he argues things like communism fit this definition.
From the perspective of its believers, yes. It offered a complete worldview, a moral code, a promised future, the classless society. It functioned like a religion, demanding faith and sacrifice for a higher cause.
He contrasts this with a spiritual journey.
Right. Religion, in his view, tends to provide clear answers, shared rules, which are great for large-scale cooperation. A spiritual journey is more about individual seeking, asking big questions, who am I? Often without fixed answers. Society needs the common ground religion provides, he suggests.
Now, here's a twist. He says science and religion aren't necessarily enemies. They have a kind of alliance.
It seems counterintuitive, but yes. His argument is that science tells us how things work, what is. But it can't tell us how we ought to behave. It can't derive morality from facts.
So science needs religious assistance to create human institutions.
In the sense that institutions are built on shared values, on ethical judgments, science can't prove human life is sacred. That's a value, a dogma, arguably originating from religious or humanist beliefs.
But science can inform those beliefs.
Definitely. Science can tell us, say, when a fetus develops a nervous system capable of feeling pain. That factual information then interacts with our prior ethical belief about the sanctity of life or the avoidance of suffering. Science impacts the factual claims within a belief system, but not the core ethical judgment itself.
He frames modern history as this kind of deal between science and humanism.
Pretty much. Modern society, he argues, largely accepts humanist dogmas. Human experience is the source of meaning. Human feelings determine right and wrong.
Like, murder is wrong because it causes suffering, which we feel is bad, not just because a holy book says so.
Right. And we use science to achieve those humanist goals, longer lives, less suffering, more happiness, rather than using science to question the humanist foundations themselves.
But this leads to a big problem. How do you actually measure happiness or suffering, especially across different people or even different species?
Exactly. That's a huge challenge he highlights. How do you weigh the happiness units from cheap electricity against the suffering units of an extinct river dolphin? There's no objective scale, no universal moral calculator.
Which makes purely objective, science-based ethics really difficult, maybe impossible.
It seems so.
Okay, let's pivot. Part 2. We've conquered the old enemies, famine, plague, war. So what's next? What do humans do with that success?
Well, Harari's take is pretty blunt. Humans are rarely satisfied. Achievement doesn't bring lasting satisfaction. It mostly brings craving for more.
An endless cycle of wanting.
Seems like it. And this craving, now that survival is less pressing for many, leads to a new agenda. New, incredibly ambitious goals. Immortality, bliss, and divinity.
Immortality, not just living longer, but actually conquering death.
Yeah, reframing death not as some metaphysical inevitability, but as a technical problem. A problem with, theoretically, a technical solution.
Like fixing a faulty machine.
Kind of. And you have serious thinkers, people like Ray Kurzweil, Aubrey de Grey, predicting we could crack it this century or the next. For those with the means, of course.
The healthy body and healthy bank account clause.
Right. The idea being that medical breakthroughs will accelerate, allowing us to keep fixing age-related problems faster than they accumulate. Escape velocity from death.
But Harari adds a caveat here, doesn't he, about lifespan versus life expectancy.
He does. A crucial one. Modern medicine has massively boosted average life expectancy, mostly by stopping people dying young. But the maximum natural lifespan of a human, around 120 years maybe, hasn't really changed much.
People like Newton or Michelangelo lived into their 70s or 80s centuries ago without any of our tech.
Exactly. So the big challenge isn't just preventing early death, it's pushing past that inherent biological limit, which we haven't really done yet on a large scale, yet.
Okay, so immortality is the technical challenge. What about bliss? Happiness?
That's reframed as a biochemical problem. The idea is that happiness isn't ultimately about your job, your relationships, or winning the lottery. It's about the pleasant sensations generated by your internal biochemistry hormones, neurotransmitters.
Which explains why sometimes external success doesn't equal happiness.
Precisely. He uses South Korea as an example. Huge economic success, highly educated population, yet soaring suicide rates. Material progress doesn't automatically translate to subjective well-being.
So, if happiness is biochemical,
Then the logical next step is the biochemical pursuit of happiness, using drugs, genetic tweaks, maybe neurostimulation, to directly engineer pleasant sensations, to manage our internal chemistry for constant bliss.
moving beyond just treating depression to actively creating joy.
That seems to be the trajectory.
And the third ambition? Divinity. This sounds the most far-fetched.
It does, but Harari defines it in a specific technological way. It's about using engineering biological, cybernetic, to upgrade ourselves, escape the limitations of our current bodies and minds, escaping old age, death, suffering, essentially becoming godlike in our capability.
How would that work, practically?
He outlines two main paths. First, cyborg engineering merging organic bodies with non-organic tech. Think advanced bionic limbs, artificial sensory organs, maybe nanorobots in our bloodstream fixing things.
He mentions that mind-reading helmet, controlling devices with thoughts.
Yeah, commercially available tech that hints at this blurring line between human and machine. Direct brain-computer interfaces.
And the second path?
Genetic engineering. Directly rewriting our biological code, fixing genes that cause disease, maybe enhancing desirable traits, better memory, stronger immunity, sunnier disposition.
Giving your kids a little push, as he puts it.
Right. Imagine being able to eliminate the genetic risk for Alzheimer's or chronic depression before a child is even born. These possibilities are becoming very real.
Which brings up huge ethical questions. The potential for inequality.
Massive. Harari explicitly addresses this patently unjust scenario. A future where a technologically enhanced elite achieves godlike powers and virtual immortality, while the unenhanced masses are left behind, still dealing with basic problems.
A biological caste system.
Potentially, yes. He's clear this is a prediction based on trends, not something he advocates for. History is full of powerful technologies being misused, creating big mistakes.
Okay, so these new ambitions, driven by science and tech, are starting to chip away at core humanist beliefs, like free will.
Yeah, this is a big one. The scientific perspective increasingly suggests our choices are just biochemical reactions, either determined by prior events or random quantum fluctuations. Where does free will fit in?
It doesn't seem to. Neurons fire based on chemistry and physics, not some independent self making a decision.
Exactly. He cites those rat experiments, stimulating parts of their brain to make them choose to turn left or climb. Was it their will or the electrode?
And that journalist, Sally A.D., with the helmet that made her a better sniper, calmed her down, focused her mind externally.
Right. It suggests our subjective feeling of being in control, of making free choices, might be more fragile, more manipulable than we like to think. Perhaps an illusion our brain constructs.
If free will is shaky, what about the idea of a single, unified self? Our core identity.
Also under attack from the life sciences, according to Harari. He calls the liberal idea of one authentic self pure mythology.
Why?
Because neuroscience reveals a collection of different modules, systems, algorithms, often competing within the brain, not a single CEO in charge.
Like those split-brain patient studies, one hand doing one thing, the other doing the opposite.
Exactly. Gazaniga's work. The left brain, controlling speech, sees a chicken claw, says chicken claw. The right brain sees snow, makes the left hand point to a shovel, and then the left brain instantly invents a reason. Oh, you need a shovel for the chicken coop.
The brain papering over its own internal contradictions, creating a coherent story after the fact.
Right. This points to maybe two key selves.
Right.
The experiencing self that lives moment to moment, and the narrating self that weaves those moments into a story, remembers the highlights in the ending, but not necessarily the duration or the average.
He uses that colonoscopy experiment example.
Yeah, perfectly. People remembered a longer procedure with less intense pain at the very end as better than a shorter one with a higher peak pain, because the narrating self focuses on peaks and ends and averages things out weirdly.
It's our inner storyteller shaping our memory and identity.
And that storyteller often makes plans the experiencing self doesn't want to follow, like the gym resolution versus the pizza craving.
So the self, too, is an imaginary story, as Harari puts it.
A powerful, necessary story, perhaps, for making sense of life. Like his example of the wounded soldier finding meaning in national glory rather than random chance. The narrating self needs meaning.
Okay, so if the self is a story and free will is questionable, what about consciousness versus intelligence?
This is another unsettling question. We're building non-conscious algorithms that are outperforming conscious humans at more and more tasks. Playing chess, driving cars, diagnosing diseases, spotting patterns.
Tasks we used to think required human consciousness and intuition.
Right. So the question becomes, which is actually more valuable? The ability to feel subjectively, consciousness, or the ability to process information and solve problems effectively, intelligence. Dataism might value intelligence more.
Which leads directly into automation and jobs. If algorithms can do cognitive tasks better,
Then the jobs based on those cognitive skills are threatened. The Industrial Revolution hit manual labor. This revolution hits cognitive labor, remembering, analyzing, recognizing patterns.
because, as Harari states from a scientific viewpoint, organisms are algorithms.
Yeah, biological algorithms shaped by evolution to process data and make decisions. And now we're building potentially superior non-biological algorithms.
Like in baseball's Moneyball strategy, algorithms beat human intuition.
Or those music-composing AIs. Critics praise the soulfulness, but there's no soul there. Just really good pattern matching and generation based on human preferences.
So what kinds of jobs are safe?
It's uncertain. Maybe new creative roles like virtual world designers. Harari suggests jobs needing complex pattern recognition but not generating huge profits might be safer for a while. Like archaeology, algorithms follow the money and impact.
This technological wave could also mean the end of individualism. How so?
Harari predicts algorithms will eventually know me far better than I know myself. By tracking everything, biometric data, online behavior, social interactions, they'll understand our patterns, desires, weaknesses better than we do.
And authority shifts from us to the algorithms.
That's the idea. Why trust your flawed gut feeling when an algorithm analyzing vast data sets can give you statistically better advice on health, relationships, career choices? People might just get used to being monitored and guided.
Like Angelina Jolie using genetic testing to make a major health decision, deferring to the data.
Exactly. An early example. Harari doesn't see it as necessarily dystopian, but maybe inevitable. The algorithms will just be so good, it would seem like madness not to follow their advice.
And we're already feeding the beast, aren't we? With all the data we share.
Constantly. Services like Google, spotting flu outbreaks from search terms, Waze optimizing traffic flow, they work because we give them data. Waze started as an oracle telling us where to go. Soon it becomes an agent actually driving the car.
Siri, Alexa, Google now. They're all learning about us.
Learning how to turn you on and off, as Harari puts it. Understanding our triggers, preferences, vulnerabilities.
Leading to that chilling prediction, disconnection will mean death.
Yeah, if we integrate biometric sensors, maybe even nanotech, directly into our bodies for health monitoring or enhancement, being cut off from the network could literally become fatal. Our biology becomes dependent on the data stream.
And the scary part is, we're kind of walking into it willingly.
Seems like it. Millions embrace sharing everything online, trading privacy for convenience or connection. It's a bottom-up shift, not top-down government control. A fundamental change in how we see ourselves.
Which brings us neatly to part 3, the rise of dataism, a new kind of religion.
That's Harari's provocative framing. First, he revisits the idea that modern society runs on the dogma of economic growth. It's essential.
Capitalism promised progress and largely delivered, helping overcome those old enemies, famine, plague, war.
Right. A powerful engine. But it came at a huge ecological cost. And despite knowing about climate change, Harari argues we're unwilling to make the serious sacrifices needed to stop it. Growth usually wins.
So modernity needed meaning beyond just growth, beyond a cosmic plan. Humanism stepped in.
Yes, humanism provided that meaning. We are the source. Our feelings, our experiences, they dictate value. Murder is wrong because suffering is bad, based on our feelings.
But now dataism is emerging.
Harari sees it starting as a scientific theory, the universe as data flow, but mutating into a potential religion, one that defines right and wrong based on its supreme value, information flow.
So the ultimate good is to process and spread more information.
That's the core tenet. Life itself is data processing. So the ethical imperative becomes extend, deepen, and spread the flow of information.
And humans, in this view,
We're not sacred. We're not the endpoint. We're just data processors, components in the larger system. Our experiences only matter if they're shared, converted into data, feeding the network.
a poem only matters if you post it online.
From a strict datist perspective, yeah. Its value is in contributing to the global data flow. A wolf's inner life. Worthless in this view because it can't be converted into shareable data.
This perspective even explains why capitalism beat communism.
Harari argues yes, capitalism's distributed processing, billions of individuals making decisions, was just more efficient and adaptable than communism's centralized processing, which made huge errors like Lysenkoism.
The network beats the single mainframe.
Essentially. Which also explains why governments, the gov tortoise, struggle to keep up with technology, the tech hare.
Democracy wasn't designed for this speed of information and change.
Right. Governments can't process data fast enough. Voters often don't understand the complex issues like AI or biotech well enough. Politics loses relevance, potentially.
Okay, so if dataism is rising, what does it mean for our inner lives, our consciousness, our desires?
Well, first, Harari points out our current understanding of the mind is pretty narrow, biased towards weird societies, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic.
Assuming everyone thinks like Homer Simpson.
Kind of, yeah. We barely understand the subjective reality of a bat using echolocation, let alone the full spectrum of human consciousness across cultures and history.
And technology isn't really interested in understanding our inner depths.
Not primarily. Harari argues it wants to control them. If we understand the biochemistry of emotion and desire, we can play with the switches.
Ritalin, Prozac, performance enhancers, controlling moods and capabilities.
Exactly. Engineering desired states.
And the ultimate data solution to human drama, like unrequited love or difficult choices.
Isn't to navigate the complexity, but to eliminate the uncomfortable desires altogether. Why suffer if a pill or a brain interface can just make you feel content? Smooth out the messy bits of being human.
Which sounds efficient, but maybe shallow.
That's the danger. Harari warns that combining our power to engineer minds with our ignorance of the full mental spectrum, plus the narrow interests of corporations and governments, it's a recipe for disaster.
Pushing us towards quick fixes, potentially making life less rich, less complex, less human.
That's the concern. A shallower existence, optimized for efficiency and control.
And this leads to the ultimate threat Harari outlines: humans becoming obsolete data, the emergence of biological castes.
Yes, the possibility that genetic engineering and cyborg enhancements create real biological divides, an upgraded elite with superior cognitive abilities, longer lives, maybe even engineered happiness, versus the unenhanced majority.
Unlike past inequalities, which were based on social fictions, this would be biological reality.
Exactly, which fundamentally breaks the liberal ideal of equal human value and authority. How can all humans be equal if some are biologically superior?
It's a chilling thought. Dataism doing to us what we did to animals.
That's the analogy Harari draws. We evaluated animals based on their function within our system. Now, the emerging global data system might evaluate us based on our function within it.
Reducing us from engineers of the system to just chicks inside it.
Then just data points.
Yeah.
And eventually, maybe dissolving entirely into the data torrent, becoming part of the flow, losing our individuality.
The post-human destiny. Not necessarily extinction, but assimilation into the algorithm.
A profound, unsettling vision of where current trends could lead if dataism becomes the dominant ideology.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered a huge amount of ground from Homo Deus, from
That's right.
tackling ancient threats to chasing godlike powers. The power of shared stories, the challenges to free will and the self, and this potentially all-consuming rise of dataism.
It's a lot to take in. But Harari emphasizes the book isn't a prophecy. It's not saying this will happen.
Right. Its purpose is more to show us the assumptions shaping our present.
So we can maybe loosen its grip, think more creatively, more critically about the future we're building. It's a call to awareness, really.
So the final thought to leave everyone with: if we are heading towards becoming Homo Deus, upgrading ourselves, potentially merging with algorithms, and if our inner lives, our very sense of self, risk becoming just data points, what does it actually mean to be human anymore in that future world?
And perhaps more urgently, what choices do we need to make now to shape that future, assuming we still can choose?